Hello and good afternoon to all of you. I hope all of you are doing well and all of you are in good health. If you remember, we had concluded the previous class with classification, wherein we have learned that classification is the process of creating a homogeneous group of data points based on certain common characteristics. We have also learned in the previous class that there are two types of classification, namely classification based on attribute and classification based on class interval. We had also learned that classification based on attribute can be of two types: simple classification or manifold classification. Further, we also learned that classification based on attribute is descriptive in nature and is also referred to as statistics of attributes, whereas classification based on class interval is numeric in nature and it's also referred to as statistics of variables. Moving forward in this class, we'll try to understand classification based on class interval in greater detail. Classification based on class interval aims at creating identifiable classes from the data points. Here, the data points are divided into classes. These classes are also referred to as class intervals. Each and every class interval has a lowest value and it has a highest value. Lowest value, which is also represented by L, and highest value is represented by U. These two values are referred to as class limits, and the difference between these two values is referred to as class magnitude. So, let us try to understand it again. Classification based on class interval aims at dividing the data points into identifiable classes, which is also called as class interval. Each and every class interval has a lowest value and a highest value, which is also represented by U and L. And the difference of this highest and lowest value represents the class magnitude. Now let us try to understand some of the critical issues of concern. The first issue of concern is how many classes should be there and what should be the class magnitude. Second, how to choose the class limit. And third, how to determine the frequency of each class. Now, there is a method suggested by H.A. Struggs, which includes 3 steps in order to determine the number of class interval or number of classes and to determine the size of the class interval. The steps are: first, determine the range. Let range be represented by R. So R is the difference between the largest and the smallest item of the given items. So range is the difference between the largest and the smallest item or of the given items. Once the range has been determined, we determine the number of class intervals. Let K represent the number of class intervals. K is equals to 1 plus 3.322 log n. So here base is 10 and n represents the number of items to be grouped. In the third step, we determine the size of the class interval, where size is represented by I, so I is equals to R by K. So these are the three steps that are involved in the process suggested by H.A. Scruggs for determining the number of class intervals and the size of the class interval. Now let us try to understand it with the help of an example. Consider there is a data set with 100 data points, with 0 as the smallest item and 200 as the largest item. So step number 1, determine the range. Range is equals to 200 minus 0, that is 200. Now determine the number of class interval. K is equals to 1 plus 3.322 log n. So here n is 100 and base is 10. So it is log 10 to the power 2. So it is 2 log 10. So log 10 base 10 is 1. So 2 into 1 is 2. So 1 plus 3.322 into 2 is 1 plus 6.644, that is 7.644, which can be approximated to 8. So here we'll have 8 class intervals or 8 classes. Now the size of the class interval can be determined by using the equation I is equals to R by K. So R is 200, K is 8, so size of class interval will be 25. So there will be 8 classes with class interval as 25. Now in order to classify the data points into the 8 classes with the class interval as 25, we need to fix the class limits. So this is a very simple example that tries to explain the process suggested by H.A. Scruggs. Now let us learn about different methods for classifying data. So we have exclusive technique, we have inclusive technique, we have true or actual class limits. Now let us try to understand it with the help of an example. Now in case of exclusive method, let us try to understand with the help of an example. So we have class interval 195 to 200. So here in case of exclusive method, scores of 195 or more but below 200 will be considered as a data point in this class interval. Again, I'll repeat it. So we have a class interval 195 to 200. So all the data points or scores of 195 or more but less than 200 will be considered in case of exclusive. Now in case of inclusive, we have a class interval 195 to 199. So here we'll include all the scores from 195 to 199, which includes 195, 196, 197, 198 and 199. So this is the difference between exclusive and inclusive, right? So in case of exclusive, 195 to all the score less than 200 will be considered, but in case of inclusive, both the limits will be included, that is 195 to 199. Now in case of true or actual class limits, if the class interval is from 195 to 199, then all the values from 194.5 to 199.5 will be considered as a part of this particular class. Again, I'll repeat it. In case of true or actual class limit, If the class interval specifies 195 to 199, then we'll consider all the values from 194.5 to 199.5. So depending on your requirement, you can either adhere to exclusive method or inclusive method or true or actual class limits. So this is the way how we intend to classify data. Now let us try to summarize whatever we've learned till now. So first, determine the number of class intervals or the number of classes. Determine the range. Determine the size of the class interval. Fix the lower limit or fix the lower class limit of the lowest class and add size of class interval to get the upper class limit. For an example, if you fix the lower class limit to 0, so it will be 0 plus 25 to determine the class interval. So fourth step is very much important. So we need to fix the lower class limit of the lowest class and add the class interval, size of the class interval to get the upper class limit. So if you fix the lower class limit to 0, so 0 plus 25 will be the upper class limit. So if you fix the lower class limit of the lowest class, then you will be capable of determining the class limit of all the other classes. So step number 5, obtain class limits for remaining classes. Then eventually count the number of items in each class and check against the total number of observation. So these are the steps that are involved in classification. So here let us learn about how to choose the class limit. So the criteria is that midpoint of the class interval should be chosen in a manner that it represents the average of the class limit, or it should be close to the average of the class limit. So this is the criteria for choosing the class limit. Now, as we have already learned, we can adapt to either exclusive, inclusive, or actual class limit for classifying the data. Now, this is a very simple example that tries to represent how to determine frequency using tally sheet. So here, what we have tried to do is we have tried to determine the frequency with the help of tally mark. So you can go through this particular example. Now let us move on to the next processing activity that is called as tabulation. Tabulation is an activity that aims at arranging the classified data into certain concise and logical order. So this is the very purpose of tabulation. So tabulation tries to organize the classified data in some order. The objective of tabulation is to summarize raw data and display the same in some compact form that can be used by the analysis process. Now, tabulation facilitates, it conserves space and reduces explanation and descriptive statements. It eases the process of comparison. It helps in summation of items, and it also helps in detecting errors and omission, and it can be used as a basis for various statistical computation. So these are the aspects that tabulation facilitates. Now there are certain generally accepted principles related to tabulation. So a table should be clear, concise, and adequate. A table should be given distinctive number. Unit of measurements should be indicated. Explanatory footnote should be associated as and when required. Source or sources of data should be explicitly represented. Columns and rows are to be well separated. Column should be numbered. Columns whose data are to be compared should be kept side by side. Table should emphasize on the relative significance of the data item. All column figures should be properly aligned. Abbreviations should be avoided. Miscellaneous and exceptional items should be placed at last. So these are some of the generally accepted principles related to tabulation. So tabulation can be done automatically or can be done manually. So manually, we have learned about tally sheet. So tabulation can be of different type. So we can have simple tabulation or one-way tabulation. We have double tabulation or two-way tabulation, or we have complex tabulation. So simple tabulation or one-way tabulation describes one characteristics. Double tabulation or two-way tabulation discusses two characteristics, whereas complex tabulation discusses many characteristics. Now, there are certain important focus points that needs to be remembered while creating table. So, while preparing table, we need to assign table number, we need to assign title, we need to assign captions as and when required, we need to place stubs, we need to have a well organized body, and we should have associated footnotes, as well as we need to specify the source of data. So essence of a good table. So it should capture objects of statistical inquiry. It should be easy to understand. It should be representable. Rows and columns should be properly indexed. The rows and columns should be logically arranged in certain order. Rows and columns should be properly separated. Row sum should be represented at right of the table, whereas column sum should be represented at the bottom of the table. In case if the data does not fit in a single table, it is logical to construct a related table. So, in this class, we have learned about the importance of classification based on numeric data, that is, classification based on class interval. We have learned about what is class limit. We have learned about what is class magnitude. We have learned about measure issues of concerns whenever we are trying to classify data based on class interval. Then we have learned about a process suggested by H.A. Scruggs that tries to determine the number of classes and the size of class interval. Then we have tried to understand the process with the help of an example. Then we have learned about exclusive, inclusive, and the allied approach for classifying data. And then we have moved on to summarizing the entire process of classifying data based on class interval, wherein we have learned 6 important steps. Then we have moved into how to choose the class limit. And we have discussed an example where we have tried to represent frequency count with the help of tally. And then we have moved on to tabulation. We have learned about the objective of tabulation, and we have also learned what tabulation facilitates. We have acquainted ourselves to certain generally accepted principles related to tabulation. We have also learned the way how tabulation can be performed and types of tabulation. We have learned certain important focus points that are to be looked upon while preparing table. And eventually, we have learned about essence of good tables. In the next class, we will step into statistics. Thank you very much and have a very good day.